Thomas, are you okay? What's happening? Why are you here all alone in this storm? Where's your dad? On a day when the blizzard was so strong that nobody wanted to go outside, my 5-year-old nephew came to visit me. I brushed off the snow from him and asked if his cheeks were cold and red, like frostbite. Shivering, he said his dad told him to get some bread from my house. He handed me the bag he was carrying and then suddenly fell. Thomas, I shouted as I caught him desperately. Later, the doorbell rang at our house. My brother-in-law, who we hadn't heard from since my nephew collapsed, stood there. Had a little emergency. Is Thomas here? He asked me, chuckling casually. Despite claiming it was urgent, I could smell perfume on him, definitely suspicious. Convinced of this, I decided to confront him. It's late if you're looking for Thomas. He's in that box, cold and asleep. This moment would unravel my brother-in-law's hidden secrets and reveal the truth about a previous accident. I'm Mary. I've been married to my husband for 2 years now. He has a brother who is 15 years older than him. My father-in-law was previously married, and my brother-in-law is from his first marriage. My husband is from the second marriage, so they're half-brothers. When my husband was born, his brother was already in middle school, so they didn't really bond during their childhood. However, when my husband was in high school and doing well academically, his brother, who was working, started criticizing him about his future plans and college choices. This led to tension between them, as my husband felt unfairly judged by someone who wasn't involved in his life or providing support. As a result, the relationship has been strained since then, and it hasn't improved as they've grown older. I remember feeling taken aback when I first met my brother-in-law during our marriage introduction. He bluntly commented, "I heard you were bringing a beauty." I was curious to see what kind of beauty she would be. Hearing my husband's complaints about his brother and experiencing his tactless remarks firsthand made me think, wow, this guy is something else. Since then, dealing with my brother-in-law has been tough. However, his wife Grace was lovely, and we hit it off with her and our family. She often visited us without my brother-in-law, bringing my nephew Thomas along. Grace was not only a great cook but also incredibly kind, almost too good for my brother-in-law. I once asked her why she married him out of curiosity. She used to work at a company where my brother-in-law was a friend of her boss. Her boss persistently urged her to go out for a meal with them, including my brother-in-law. Grace shared with me how, when she felt pressured by her boss to drink more and more, my brother-in-law stepped in and politely intervened, which made her see him in a positive light. It's hard to reconcile this with how my brother-in-law acts now. Learning about their beginnings surprised me. Grace joked that back then, her boss's word was law, and my brother-in-law used to show a kinder side. Despite her mixed feelings about him now, I could still sense her affectionate tone when she talked about him. Being older than us, Grace has taught us a lot and always given us valuable advice, making her someone we deeply trust and rely on. Their son Thomas is 5 years old, incredibly cute, honest and kind, much like Grace. My husband and I, who don't have children, absolutely adore our nephew. Then one day we received devastating news. Grace had been in a car accident. She had fallen asleep while driving with Thomas in the back seat and had crashed. Rushing to the hospital, we found out Grace had already passed away. The sudden loss hit us like a heavy blow, leaving us overwhelmed with grief. The thought of never seeing Grace again brought torrents of tears. Although Thomas seemed to be okay, the details were unclear. It didn't make sense that Grace, always so careful, would doze off at the wheel, especially with Thomas in the car. The police found sleeping pills in Grace's system, which puzzled us because she never mentioned having trouble sleeping. We wondered if my brother-in-law knew something, especially considering Grace's recent complaints about their relationship. However, when we saw him after the accident, he looked exhausted, not his usual arrogant self. Despite our suspicions, we couldn't help but feel sorry for him. Eventually, it was revealed that Grace had been secretly dealing with the stress of parenting, leading to the tragic accident. While we mourned Grace's loss, we were grateful that Thomas only suffered minor injuries. After Grace's funeral and the wake, the ache of her loss stayed with us, but life gradually settled back into its routine. With my brother-in-law busy with work, my husband and I often fetched Thomas from daycare, caring for him until evening and sometimes even on weekends, becoming more involved in his life than ever before. We wanted to provide him with as much stability as possible after losing his mother. This brought us into more frequent contact with my brother-in-law, who would pick up Thomas from our home after work, his dedication to his son evident despite his grief. We tried to support him by sending him home with homemade meals. However, occasionally we caught a whiff of women's perfume on him, which struck us as odd for someone coming straight from work. It was unmistakably feminine. Though I never broached the subject directly with my brother-in-law, I couldn't shake the suspicion whenever I detected that scent. It reignited my doubts about him, especially in light of Grace's passing. Those suspicions lingered, refusing to fade away. Apart from the perfume mystery, we were also troubled by Thomas's subdued behavior lately, understandable given his mother's passing, but concerning nonetheless. I live in an area where snow is rare, but this year we were hit by an uncommonly harsh cold snap, and the heavy snowfall from yesterday hadn't melted. It's Saturday today, and since daycare is closed, Thomas is at home with my brother-in-law while my husband and I relax indoors. As the day progressed, the snowfall intensified, turning into a fierce blizzard with powerful winds. Peering out the window at the swirling snow, visibility was poor. But I noticed a figure approaching from afar. Someone's out in this weather. I hope they're all right, I remarked to my husband, squinting to see better. Could it be a child? It's too dangerous for a child to be out alone in this storm, I added, growing alarmed. I'm going to check it out, I declared, hastily bundling up and venturing outside. The biting cold outside whipped at my face and hands, the snow and wind harsh against any exposed skin. The figure I had glimpsed struggled through the snow, inching closer to our house. Uncertain of who it might be, but feeling compelled to help, I decided to bring them inside until the blizzard passed. As I drew nearer, to my astonishment, I realized it was my nephew Thomas. He was supposed to be at home with my brother-in-law, not out here alone. Thomas, are you all right? Why are you here all by yourself in this weather? Where's your dad? I asked, brushing the snow from him. His cheeks were icy red, like frostbite. Dad told me to get some bread from Auntie's house, he said, shivering, before handing me the bag he was carrying and collapsing. Thomas, I cried out, rushing to lift him. My husband, who had followed me outside, hurried to help. We hurried Thomas to the hospital in our car, worriedly trying to rouse him during the journey. Despite our efforts, he remained semi-conscious, mumbling as if in a dream, leaving us unsettled. Upon reaching the hospital, Thomas was promptly examined. The doctors determined he was severely chilled, but otherwise showed no signs of injury. While we were relieved by the diagnosis, the doctor noted Thomas's unclear consciousness, which heightened our concern. Could there be more to his condition than meets the eye? With the doctor's words echoing in our minds, we decided to involve the police. While my husband stayed with Thomas, I rushed back home to prepare for his extended stay at the hospital. Given that Thomas had been staying with us more frequently lately, we had some of his belongings on hand. As I gathered his things, the doorbell rang. My brother-in-law stood at the door, casually asking, "Hey, had some urgent business. Is Thomas here?" Despite my continuous attempts to reach him on his cell phone after finding Thomas collapsed, I couldn't get through. By the time we arrived at the hospital, I had given up trying to contact him and focused on Thomas's medical care. Seeing my brother-in-law at our doorstep surprised me, as I thought we hadn't managed to inform him. Perhaps my husband had reached out to him after we split up. Despite wanting to confront him about his absence, I held my tongue and inquired about what led Thomas to trek alone through the heavy snow to our house. My brother-in-law explained he was called away to work unexpectedly and left Thomas at home, assuming he would stay put. He was unaware of why Thomas left but found a note indicating going to Auntie's house, suggesting Thomas remembered him mentioning the need to buy bread soon and decided to help out by heading to our place. However, amidst his explanation, I detected the familiar scent of perfume emanating from my brother-in-law, the same one I had noticed before. Several aspects of my brother-in-law's explanation raised red flags. It seemed odd that he was called into work on such a severe weather day and left Thomas alone at home, especially since he typically asks us to care for him during such times. Additionally, we had never supplied bread to my brother-in-law before, so it was puzzling why Thomas would assume he could find it at our house. His story didn't add up, and I couldn't shake the feeling of suspicion. As I questioned him further, pointing out the inconsistencies, he became defensive, offering strained excuses. When I finally confronted him about the unmistakable scent of feminine perfume, he erupted in anger, demanding Thomas's whereabouts. Faced with his hostility, I decided to test him. It's too late. If you're looking for Thomas, he's in that box, cold and asleep. I gestured toward a large cardboard box in the corner, pretending to be distraught. Peeking through my fingers, I observed his reaction to my words. My brother-in-law, struggling to contain a smirk and on the verge of laughter, approached the cardboard box, insisting, "We need to get him to a hospital right away." His demeanor both infuriated me and deepened my suspicions. Naturally, the box was empty when he opened it. Enraged by the prank, he demanded, "What are you playing at in a situation like this?" I pretended innocence, saying, "Oh, I meant we use that box to transport him to the hospital," and provided him with the hospital's details. Despite seeming like he wanted to say more, he quickly departed for the hospital at my prompting, whether feigned or genuine concern. By the time he reached my house, Thomas had regained full consciousness, and my husband and a police officer were taking his statement. It seemed they had obtained a statement from Thomas indicating, "My uncle told me to leave the house," suggesting we might need to have a more in-depth conversation with my brother-in-law. Subsequently, more police officers gathered at the hospital, prompting a detailed discussion with my brother-in-law. As he arrived at the hospital, he found himself surrounded by officers, bewildered and resistant until my husband informed him, "Thomas has regained consciousness, and we know everything." His demeanor shifted abruptly as he panicked, blurting out, "But Thomas is dead." Without hesitation, he was swiftly placed into a patrol car and taken to the police station for questioning. According to the police, my brother-in-law repeated the same story he had told me. But his inconsistencies were quickly spotted, and he began to falter when confronted with the results of Thomas's blood test, confirming our suspicion that he had been drugged. Our decision to report Grace's accidental death, which we suspected was caused by sleeping pills, prompted the blood tests for Thomas, raising concerns of a similar drugging. Witnessing Thomas in a dazed state immediately reminded us of Grace's tragic accident. The test results confirmed our suspicions. Thomas had indeed ingested sleeping pills. During police questioning, my brother-in-law admitted to his scheme. He believed that if Thomas fell asleep outside in the snow and froze to death, suspicion wouldn't fall on him. However, he refused to divulge where he obtained the pills used in his plan. These pills aren't available over the counter and require a hospital prescription. Yet there was no record of my brother-in-law ever being prescribed them, leaving the police puzzled as to how he obtained them. After a week in the hospital, Thomas, fully recovered, was placed in our care temporarily as my brother-in-law was detained by the police. We told Thomas that his uncle was away on a business trip. While preparing dinner one evening, Thomas suddenly mentioned, "Dad has a lady friend he's close with." This revelation took me by surprise, and I stopped what I was doing to ask him to repeat. According to Thomas, this woman often stayed overnight at their house with my brother-in-law. During her visits, my brother-in-law would devote all his attention to this woman, leaving Thomas feeling lonely and neglected. Sometimes they would go out together, or my brother-in-law would isolate himself with her in his room. Thomas expressed his discomfort, saying, "It's lonely, and I have to wait even when I'm hungry. I'm scared of that woman because she smells strong, and I don't like her. What if Dad comes to pick me up, and I have to see her again at home?" While consoling Thomas, I gently probed for more details about this woman. I then relayed this information to my husband and provided it to the police, describing a woman who appeared to have a close relationship with my brother-in-law. Acting on this information, the police searched for someone matching Thomas's description and identified a junior colleague from my husband's workplace. She was brought in for questioning, and Thomas was asked to identify her through a one-way mirror, confirming she was the woman frequently visiting my brother-in-law's house. A review of her prescription history revealed she had been prescribed sleeping pills shortly before Grace's accident. Moreover, the components of the sleeping pills found in both Grace and Thomas's systems matched, confirming the use of the same substance. Confronted with this evidence, the police intensified their questioning. Initially resistant, the woman eventually cracked under the pressure, especially after being falsely informed that my brother-in-law had confessed. Her demeanor changed drastically, turning pale and panicked. My brother-in-law and his mistress were engaged in an affair and plotted to eliminate Grace, who stood in the way of their relationship. They secretly laced Grace's drink with sleeping pills, causing her to fall asleep at the wheel in a staged accident. Their plan was to make it appear as though Grace's death was an accident, clearing the path for them to marry. Similarly, they intended for Thomas to freeze to death outside, also making it look like an accident. They communicated through handwritten notes to avoid leaving electronic traces. Thomas's testimony and the confessions from my brother-in-law and his mistress led to their arrest for plotting the deaths of Grace and Thomas. This shocking case of a husband and his mistress orchestrating the deaths of his wife and child as accidents captured national attention, making headlines across the country. The mistress, distancing herself from my brother-in-law, claimed it was all his idea, pleading, "I was just pulled into it." Their lack of remorse and desperate plea for leniency only worsened their standing in court, and they were likely to face significant consequences. Meanwhile, my husband and I, having grown to love Thomas as our own, are in the process of adopting him. We're determined to officially welcome him into our family and are considering relocating to a more serene environment. With my brother-in-law's name plastered across the news, we're wary of any negative impact it may have on Thomas if we remain in the same area. Our hope is that a change of scenery, surrounded by nature, will aid in Thomas's emotional healing and afford him the freedom to thrive. While we had once hoped for children of our own, we've chosen to prioritize our love and care for Thomas. It's our commitment to honor Grace's memory by ensuring Thomas grows up feeling cherished and supported.